Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans. Welcome to The Bunker. You join me for part 2 of my review of the 151st Gilead graduation. So the Gilead classes, as I've explained previously, are basically an elite school whereby special full-time servants, in other words, staff members of Jehovah's Witnesses, usually high-ranking, usually working in facilities around the world or as missionaries or as traveling overseas. They get invited to this 5-month course and they get drilled in the Jehovah's Witness way of doing things, the organizational way of doing things, and what Jehovah's Witnesses' beliefs are in quite some detail. So they have these Gilead graduations twice a year. We are being treated to the 151st Gilead graduation, and we're up to the point in the program where they show us the inside story. In other words, basically a studio segment where they interview selected students who are graduating. So without further ado, let's roll the first clip.
Adrian, your theocratic started at a very early age. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, my parents had helped me to know that I wanted to serve Jehovah early. And then when I was around 11, there were 5 young single pioneer sisters that all moved into my congregation as need graders. So, of course, they were my heroes. And one of them knew some American Sign Language, and she started conducting Bible studies and interpreting the meeting for the deaf in the area. And she started teaching me a little bit, too. I was trying to help out.
Is that you there at 11 years of age?
That's me and my little brother. I think about that time, yeah. So a few years later, when I was a teenager, this sister had to leave the area, and so there were the Bible studies there. So I was trying to help out as much as I could. But it was challenging then because there were no sign language publications yet.
Yeah, so how did you do that without any publications?
I tried different things. One thing is every Saturday night you would find me sitting with the Watchtower on one knee and a sign language dictionary on the other knee, and I would just look up every word.
You mean you looked up every word?
Yeah, it was the best I could do at the time. But I got a lot of help too, because the deaf were so kind and so generous in helping me and so patient.
We've just been hearing from Adrian Graham on the Inside Story, the special feature from the 151st Gilead graduation. I found it really interesting, the part where she said,
my parents had helped me to know that I wanted to serve Jehovah early.
My parents had helped me to know that I wanted to serve Jehovah. You're talking really, aren't you, about child indoctrination? How are you helped to know something? You either know it or you don't, especially in the context of being a child and not having a clue what you know, literally being dependent on being educated, on being told how the world works and what the do's and don'ts are. You are utterly dependent on your parents to figure these things out. So let's not be fooled into thinking that Adrienne was born as a Jehovah's Witness, which is what she's insinuating here. Oh, they helped me to know that I was a Jehovah's Witness. No, Adrienne, they indoctrinated you as a Jehovah's Witness. And then Adrian goes on to describe what the organization has come to refer to repeatedly as positive peer pressure. She had 5 single sisters move into her congregation. She refers to them as need graters. If you're unfamiliar with Jehovah's Witness parlance, that refers to people who move to where the need is great. So they might move from one part of the earth to another, to a country where they perceive there to be more people who are interested in studying, or they might move to a different part of the same country. In any case, she was clearly influenced by these young Jehovah's Witness sisters, or they were older to her, clearly. For me, this is yet more evidence of how this organization works. It's not about establishing what's true for yourself. It's about keeping up with the Joneses. It's about being influenced by those around you and aspiring to be like them. I think that's a huge part of this religion. And indeed, the whole point of this Inside Story segment is so that Jehovah's Witnesses, particularly young Jehovah's Witnesses, will watch these stories, will watch these Gilead graduates and think, you know what? I want to be like them.
Imagine there's 2 people having a conversation and you want to get to the other side. Now, the way I grew up, my culture is that I need to approach them and excuse myself, be acknowledged, and then I can move on. But in sign language, it's different. If 2 people are having a signed conversation, they value their eye contact and the flow of their communication much more than they value my idea of what's polite. So in sign language, you just move on straight through the conversation, minimal distraction. No weaving and dancing, bobbing. No, you just go straight on through.
No waving, no dancing, no bobbing, just straight through. We should have applied that to your assignments in class.
There's probably some truth to that. So it was difficult to adapt, but of course, after some time, I got the hang of it, and there were other adjustments, of course, that you have to make to culture. And I learned a valuable lesson, and that is that language and culture are intrinsically linked. You can't really have one without the other. And if you're learning a new language, you have to just adapt. You have to be willing to change. And the best thing to do is that if there are no scriptural principles involved, just adopt the culture and the value of the native language users. And that's what Paul meant. He said, become all things to people of all sorts.
We're watching Gilead graduate Joel Graham discussing language and the lessons he's learned in learning American Sign Language. I chose this clip for 2 reasons. First of all, just the humor and the way the video is edited. It was just really cheesy and wooden and awkward, wasn't it? When it cut to the studio audience laughing at the host discussing the bobbing and ducking or whatever it was. It wasn't really funny. The audience laughed anyway, and the way it was edited was trying to make it look funnier than it really was. So I found that whole thing awkward and weird. But what I especially found interesting was where Joel Graham was talking about culture and scriptural principles.
And if you're learning a new language, you have to just adapt. You have to be willing to change. And the best thing to do is that if there are no scriptural principles involved, just adopt the culture and the value of the native language users.
Some of you will remember that recently on this channel, I discussed this whole issue of culture. It was actually Sushi 302. Jehovah's Witnesses have 2 stances on culture. A thumbnail will appear if Tibor is gracious. And that title really sums it up. It's well emphasized, I feel, in what Joel is saying here. on the one hand, Jehovah's Witnesses hook people in by saying, we allow you to express your culture. You don't have to get rid of your culture in order to become one of Jehovah's Witnesses. But the truth of it is, and the truth only comes out once you're sold on the whole thing, once you're a card-carrying believer. But the truth of it is that scriptural principles are the deciding factor. In other words, if culture clashes with what Jehovah's Witnesses understand the Bible to say, or with the Jehovah's Witness interpretation of the Bible, guess what? The culture has to give way. And this was made so clear in the May JW Broadcasting episode, where Mark Sanderson, governing body member, just flat out said, we need to be willing to put our culture to one side in favor of unity. So I'm glad that Joel Graham, Gilead graduate, mentioned this, even if it was just fleeting as part of a broader discussion on language, because it perfectly demonstrates the fact that in the Jehovah's Witness religion, culture must give way if it conflicts with scriptural principles.
Our next guest is Brother Christopher Kitts. Before he came to Gilead, he had a very interesting assignment. Please welcome Chris. Chris, before we talk about your most recent assignment, I'd like to talk about your early years as a zealous evangelizer.
Okay.
So this picture, how old were you?
I was about 4 years old right there.
4 years old. And I see even back in the day that you were very fashion conscious.
Thank you. Personally, I think it's the socks with the sandals that brought that whole outfit together.
Yeah. Well, we love the picture, and we understand you had a love for the ministry too. So tell us a little bit about those early years.
Yeah, I always had a joy in the ministry. I loved it. It was my happy place. My mother would pick me up from school as a kid, and she would take me out with her and the other pioneers. And when I got baptized, I started auxiliary pioneering. And then as soon as I graduated from high school, I started regular pioneering.
Wow, that's excellent, Chris. Now, I understand that you also had a theocratic goal from a very young age.
Yeah. I got baptized at 10, and my circuit overseer at the time was Richard Ash. And he got down on his knee, and he said to me, Christopher, when you grow up, you're going to be a circuit overseer just like me. And his words had a big impact on my little heart. I cherished them. And I actually set circuit work as a goal. And then in 2018, I was invited into the circuit work down in Richmond, Virginia. And that was amazing. I was in the circuit work there for about a year. And it was about 30 years later that I ran into Brother Ash when I was visiting Bethel. And I got to tell him he was right. And I got to share with him what an impact he had on me as a child. And it really made me think of the impact that spiritually mature ones can have on young ones, helping them to set goals that can help them have the best life now.
We're watching Christopher Kitts, Gilead graduate, speaking at the 151st Gilead graduation. He's talking here about his journey, about how he started in the preaching work aged 4. Make of that what you will. The thought of a 4-year-old going round telling grown-ups on their doorstep what their belief should be. I'll let you decide for yourself whether that's right or wrong. But in any case, this Christopher Kitts seems to have a feeling of destiny, doesn't he? He seems to be exuding this confidence at least in my opinion, that he is a person of significance. That's what's coming across to me. And he relates this story of meeting Richard Ashe at his baptism. He got baptized at the age of 10. So at the age of 10, he was pledging his entire life to the Jehovah's Witness religion. That's even younger than I was. I was 11. So at the age of 10, he gets baptized, and his circuit overseer, Richard Ashe, predicts, or at least that's the way it comes across, that he will become a circuit overseer one day. Clearly, it wasn't a prediction. I'm sure Christopher isn't suggesting that Richard Ashe is somehow a prophet or somehow has clairvoyance so that he can look into the future and know whether a 10-year-old will end up as a circuit overseer or not. Richard Ashe was simply expressing his hope that this 10-year-old would become a circuit overseer. This is a perfect example of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you feel as though this is your destiny, if you feel as though it's something that you are almost built for, something that's intended for you, a path that has been laid out for you, of course you're going to go above and beyond to reach that goal. So that's what Christopher is describing here. What fascinates me is the emphasis on Richard Ashe, because if you know anything about the cover-up of child sexual abuse by Jehovah's Witnesses, the name Richard Ashe should ring some bells.
But within the congregation, ours is a spiritual protection. When we're talking about physical protection, that's up to the secular authorities to provide.
It states in paragraph 3, there is a time to keep quiet when your words should prove to be few. Do you see that?
Yes,
You
sir.
know, Mr.
I
Joe,
object to that. This is a violation of the First Amendment, freedom of religion, freedom of association.
So that was Richard Ashe, the famous Richard Ashe, who inspired the young Christopher Kitts to become a circuit overseer, who Christopher Kitts clearly looks up to, and who we're all supposed to look up to, because Richard Ashe is being featured so prominently in this story on the Inside Story. In case you're interested, Richard Ashe is described in an article in Daily Beast. Hopefully Tibor can overlay as I'm reading, but it's an article titled "The Secret Database of Jehovah's Witness Child Abusers." On April 1st, 2014, a high-ranking member of the Jehovah's Witnesses named Richard Ashe was answering deposition questions about cases of child sexual abuse when he made a rare, perhaps unintentional admission. Somewhere in their organization, a group comprising nearly 11,000 congregations in the United States alone, exists an archive of documents detailing the names and locations of every known child abuser within their American membership. The deposition, footage of which appears in The Witnesses, a 2-part Oxygen documentary compiling 5 years of reporting from the Center for Investigative Reporting's Trey Bundy, and which debuts February 7th and 8th, marked the first public evidence that such a database existed, but it was not the last. So yes, thank you, Christopher, for mentioning your mentor, Richard Ashe. You'll forgive me if I say that I'm not quite as enthralled with him as you seem to be.
In 2005, I went to the ministerial training school. And then after that, I got assigned from where I grew up in Long Island, New York, to the potato farms of Wisconsin, in a little town called Anago. I spent 3 years there, And then I went to the Amish country. I spent 6 years in an even smaller town called Neilsville. And then I spent 3 years in Wausau, little city. And that experience was amazing because that's where Jehovah gave me my training. I learned a lot about myself. Jehovah rubbed off a lot of the rough edges. I learned about faith because in those assignments, I saw Jehovah always provide me work, places to live in areas where sometimes there weren't. And I saw some of my Bible students progress to baptism, and I made friendships that will last forever.
It's at this point in the conversation where I'm really starting to dislike this Christopher Kitts character. There seems to be so much false modesty laced into his narrative and the way he expresses himself. He's constantly saying things that are clearly intended to promote him as being somehow special. He talks about Jehovah training him when he was on one of his assignments, a bit like, I guess, Yoda training Luke Skywalker. That's what I'm imagining. So Jehovah specifically trained Christopher Kitts. I'm Christopher Kitts, and I've been trained by Jehovah. He talks about Jehovah knocking off his rough edges, implying that he no longer has any rough edges. He's been refined by Jehovah early on in his theocratic career. And he also makes the bold claim that Jehovah has always, or at least during his assignment, Jehovah sorted him out with employment in a part of the world where employment was hard to come by, and Jehovah sorted him out with housing. What are you supposed to think if you're watching this story, if you're watching the inside story as a Jehovah's Witness who's just lost their job, or who has been out of work for some time and is struggling to find a new job? What are you supposed to think if you're watching this video as a homeless Jehovah's Witness, or as a Jehovah's Witness in a developing country who is living in squalor, who cannot find adequate housing? And then this character called Christopher Kitts swans along and says, oh, well, I'm special. Jehovah sorted me out with employment and housing because I'm Christopher Kitts. I've been trained by Jehovah, and Jehovah's knocked off all of my rough edges.
Yeah, I was appointed a missionary, and I was sent to the East Africa branch. And I was assigned to circuit work in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania.
So from Virginia to Tanzania, that's quite a jump.
Yeah.
So how'd you feel about that?
I was excited. It was a new adventure. And I didn't know the language, so I'd have to learn Swahili. I'd have to learn Tanzanian Sign Language. So I would have an interpreter that would travel with me from congregation to congregation. So it was a new adventure with me and Jehovah, new culture. I couldn't wait.
There must have been challenges, though, and I think you related one to me or more that happened soon after you got there. So can you tell us about that and the effect it had on you?
Yeah. Yeah, as soon as I arrived in my assignment in Dar es Salaam, the COVID-19 pandemic started. And so now I wasn't going to be able to visit the congregations in person. I would not meet the brothers and sisters face to face. I would have to serve them over Zoom and over the phone. And about 6 months into my assignment, I woke up one morning and I had some pressure on my chest. And I was feeling anxiety because I was alone. I was isolated. My interpreter lived 6 hours away. He connected over Zoom and over the phone. And because I showed up to this little village the same time the pandemic started, as a foreigner, not knowing the language, it created some real difficulties between me and some of the villagers. So I was feeling anxiety. I was feeling alone. There were times I was scared. And for one of the first times in my life, I was feeling depressed. So I went to Jehovah in prayer and I asked him, did I do something wrong? Should I go home?
Chris, that must have been such a difficult time. How did Jehovah help you?
Jehovah's amazing. He helped me right away see what the solution was. I was giving so much in the assignment. I needed more time alone with Jehovah. So I started waking up at 5:30 in the morning. And that's early for me. I like my sleep. But it was what I needed. I'd make my coffee, and I would go outside, and I'd watch the African sun wake up. And as I would watch the sunrise, I felt peace, because I felt like Jehovah was right there with me.
Chris, I believe you were going to share one of those, a picture of one of those beautiful African sunrises with us. Is that not true?
Yeah, that picture doesn't even do it justice.
Yeah. Well, I can see why that would help you.
I'm going to make a prediction, much like Richard Ashe. The infamous Richard Ashe made a prediction regarding Christopher Kitts. I'm going to make a prediction that Christopher Kitts will end up as a governing body member, because I'm seeing all of the ego that I would expect to see in a prospective governing body member. This guy loves himself. He cannot tell a story without lacing it with references to how brilliant he is. I especially like the part where he refers to his anxiety and he says,
I was giving so much in the assignment. I needed more time alone with Jehovah.
oh yes, that was my problem. I was just giving too much of myself. There was so much of myself that I wanted to give. And it was putting me in this terrible situation. Oh, give over. This guy really, really fancies himself. It's coming across loud and clear. As to this story about going to Tanzania, I'm sorry, I've listened to this 2 or 3 times, and the first time I listened to this story, I assumed he was talking about contracting COVID-19, because he talks about going to Tanzania at the start of the pandemic and waking up one morning with a pressure on his chest. But then, as he continues to tell the story, he doesn't say anything about going to get tested or receiving any form of treatment or being in quarantine. It sounds like this pressure on his chest was purely due to anxiety. I mean, I don't know. I'm willing to be corrected on this. But any confusion on my part is not my fault. It's his fault for not telling the story or for the way it's been edited or whatever. In any case, apparently the story that we all pressingly need to hear is that Christopher Kitts went to Tanzania and found it difficult because the local community were suspicious about him as a foreigner traveling to their community at a time that coincided with the outbreak of a global pandemic. That's apparently his problem. That's the huge issue that he needed the almighty, omnipotent creator of the universe to step in and help him with. And of course, as we've already learned, Christopher is on quite close terms with Jehovah because Jehovah trained him personally and helped knock off all of his rough edges. So all Christopher needed to do was approach Jehovah in prayer and ask for help. with his depression, and don't even get me started on mental health and the clumsy way this organization approaches mental health. You never hear them advising approaching a counselor or a therapist. There's always some hairy-fairy solution in the Bible or in speaking to the elders. In this case, the solution is, I prayed to Jehovah, and Jehovah inspired me to wake up at 5:30 in the morning so that I could watch the African sunrise.
I'd make my coffee, and I would go outside, and I'd watch the African sun wake up.
Brilliant, Christopher. So that's the solution for people who are struggling with their mental health. Get up early, make yourself a coffee, and watch the sunrise, and that will fix everything. Okay, well, that worked for you. Brilliant. I'm kind of not surprised that it worked for you because, quite frankly, it doesn't sound like your challenge was really all that challenging. It was just you getting used to a different culture and a different community at an awkward time during the outset of a pandemic. But ultimately, what I'm learning from this story is that Christopher Kitts is perfect material to rise up the Jehovah's Witness hierarchy. I don't think I'm being unkind in saying that this guy is clearly full of himself.
Now, Chris, as you look back on your journey, you definitely had some high notes and some low notes. So what lessons have you learned?
I learned that love transcends language. Love has the ability to bypass the mind where words are formed into sentences, and it can pierce right into the heart where emotions and feelings come from. I needed an interpreter to translate my words, but love needs no interpretation. Those brothers and sisters could see how much I loved them as I struggled to learn their language, and I saw how much they loved me as they patiently worked with me and helped me. And I could see Jehovah's love for them. It was coming off the pages of the Bible as we read them scriptures. And I could see their love for Jehovah as they implicitly followed the direction from the governing body. They viewed it as coming from Jehovah, and they followed it even if it came to them at a cost. And I also learned that you can see Jehovah in creation, and you can hear his voice in your Bible reading, and you can feel his love coming from the brothers and sisters even over Zoom. And this assignment taught me that even if you feel lonely, or if you're isolated because of a pandemic, or you're in prison bonds, you're never alone.
Chris, thank you for sharing your illuminating story with us. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Chris, for your illuminating story. Actually, it has been quite illuminating. I think that viewers of my channel who need to learn more about the Jehovah's Witness organization and how it works will find quite a few interesting clues in what Christopher was just saying. He talks there about love and how love has the ability to bypass the mind.
Love has the ability to bypass the mind where words are formed into sentences, and it can pierce right into the heart where emotions and feelings come from.
Well, this is more or less what I've been saying in rebuttal after rebuttal, particularly testimonials such as this that appeal to emotion, that are clearly intended to tug on the heartstrings. If you can play on people's emotions, if you can get through to their hearts, you don't need reason, you don't need logic, you don't need facts, You don't need things to make sense. If you can just tap straight into people's feelings, then you can basically convince them of anything. And this Christopher character seems to have figured that out. He seems to be quite proud of the fact that he doesn't need to actually give people information. He doesn't actually need to educate people in Tanzania or wherever he is. He doesn't need to be an educator in any meaningful sense. He just needs to make people feel good. And isn't that what the Jehovah's Witness propaganda, the Jehovah's Witness message is all about? Giving people fanciful thoughts that will make them feel better about their futures. And he also goes on to talk about the control that the governing body has over members.
They implicitly followed the direction from the governing body. They viewed it as coming from Jehovah, and they followed it even if it came to them at a cost.
Even if it came at a cost. That's what following the governing body is all about. Being willing to do whatever you're told by the religious leadership, no matter the cost. Only with Jehovah's Witnesses, when we talk about cost, we're not just talking about some kind of inconvenience. We're not just talking about, the risk of, say, crossing a crocodile-infested river to get to a Kingdom Hall meeting or an assembly, which is the sort of experience you will commonly read about in Jehovah's Witness literature, specifically when we're talking about parts of Africa. It's not just inconvenience. As a Jehovah's Witness, you have to be willing to pay the ultimate price, especially when it comes to blood transfusions. You must be willing to value your faith, to value your obedience to the faithful slave over your very life, so that you will turn down a life-saving blood transfusion if it means staying faithful to your religious views. That's the cost. So thank you, Christopher, for including that in your interview. I don't know, he just fascinates me. I hope we see more of him. I have a feeling we will. I'd like to see more of that kind of wide-eyed, emotional rhetoric. And I think he has a future. I really do, in this organization. He is a prime candidate to rise up the Jehovah's Witness hierarchy. But that's all I have for you. Those were my thoughts on the inside story, or part 2 of the 151st Gilead graduation. Look out for part 3 in the coming days, where I give my thoughts on the concluding talks of the graduation ceremony. But I hope you've enjoyed what I've presented so far. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lloyd Evans channel for more such videos. And as always, thank you for watching.